The midnight train. The small town of Millfield had long whispered of the midnight train, a phantom locomotive that appeared without warning, its wheels silent yet unyielding, gliding along tracks that were otherwise empty. Locals spoke of travelers who had boarded it, pale-faced and silent, and were never seen again. Some claimed the train appeared only to those in moments of deep despair or curiosity too strong for their own good, a spectral summons that could not be resisted. On this damp October night, the fog hung low over the tracks, swallowing the distant whistle of an ordinary freight train and hinting at something far more sinister moving through the gloom. Elias, a young man who had recently returned to Millfield after years away, stood on the deserted platform. He had heard the stories growing up, but the lure of discovering whether the tales were true pulled at him with a magnetic force. His hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets, fingers brushing against the worn ticket stub he had found tucked into an old journal in his late grandfather's attic. The stub bore no date, no time, only the words, "For the last ride, midnight awaits." The chill in the night air carried an electric tension, each breath visible in fleeting clouds that drifted into the fog like ghosts themselves. The platform remained silent for long minutes, save for the distant groan of an ordinary train approaching from the north. Elias's pulse quickened. He squinted into the mist, and slowly, impossibly, he saw it. A train, black as ink, headlights dim and wavering, wheels glinting faintly under the lantern light. The cars seemed longer than they should be, stretching endlessly into the darkness, smoke curling upward with a scent of burned coal and something acrid, almost metallic. A faint hiss of steam whispered through the fog, a sound that felt more alive than mechanical, as if the train itself were breathing, observing, waiting. He hesitated at the edge of the platform, aware that each step forward would cross a threshold from which there might be no return. From somewhere deep within the fog, he heard the faint murmur of voices, passengers aboard the train, or echoes of those who had been claimed before. The sound was hypnotic, weaving between whispers and a low hum that resonated in his chest, urging him onward. A cold gust brushed past him, carrying the scent of smoke and iron, and the train's doors hissed open silently, inviting, beckoning. The platform lights flickered, shadows dancing erratically across the wooden boards. Elias's heartbeat thundered in his ears, a frantic accompaniment to the ethereal pull of the train. As he stepped closer, fog curling around his ankles like grasping fingers, he could see the first of the passengers, pale, silent, staring straight ahead, eyes empty, their lips sealed in an eternal, frozen anticipation. One reached out toward him, not in welcome, but in a gesture that seemed both warning and insistence. The train waited, patient and eternal, and for a moment, time itself seemed suspended. Elias knew, with a strange certainty, that stepping aboard would change everything. Elias hesitated for a heartbeat longer, then drew in a shaky breath and stepped onto the train. The floorboards beneath his feet were surprisingly solid, warm despite the chill outside, yet they emitted a low, vibrating hum that seemed to echo in his very bones. The corridor stretched ahead, narrow and dimly lit by flickering lanterns that cast long, wavering shadows along the polished wooden walls. A musty scent filled the air, a mixture of old coal, leather, and something faintly metallic, like blood long dried but still present in memory. Each step echoed softly, though he was certain no one else was moving. He turned a corner into one of the carriages and froze. Rows of passengers sat motionless, their posture unervingly perfect, hands resting neatly on their laps. Their faces were pale, eyes wide and unblinking, each gaze fixed somewhere beyond the visible, as if staring into another realm entirely. A few heads turned ever so slightly toward him, yet they did not speak or move. Elias swallowed, the silence pressing down, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the faint hiss of steam from the locomotive. There was an undeniable aura of waiting, an air thick with patience and foreboding, as if the passengers themselves were suspended between life and death, trapped in perpetual anticipation. A small girl seated near the window caught his eye. She was no older than 7, her dress an outdated style, frayed at the edges. Her eyes were deep pools of pale gray, reflecting dim lantern light, and she held a doll whose button eyes seemed unnaturally lifelike. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her lips moved, forming words that Elias could hear only in his mind. Sit, stay, forever. He blinked, and the words disappeared, leaving only the oppressive silence and the feeling that the girl's gaze had followed him wherever he moved. As he continued down the carriage, the train seemed to stretch impossibly, the corridor elongating in ways that defied spatial logic. The distant hum of the engine rose and fell rhythmically, echoing like a heartbeat, a hypnotic cadence that seemed to call to him, urging him to continue further into the train's depths. Every doorway he passed revealed more passengers, each pale, silent, and unnervingly still, their eyes always ahead, never directly acknowledging him. Yet he felt their awareness, a silent pressure that pressed upon his mind, as if they knew his thoughts before he had even formed them. At the far end of the carriage, a door led to a larger compartment bathed in dim amber light. Curiosity warred with fear, but he approached it cautiously. Inside, the air was warmer, heavier, and filled with the subtle scent of incense and decay. Chairs lined the walls in a circle, and in the center, an elderly man sat, head bowed, hands folded neatly on a cane. Though his eyes were closed, Elias could feel their presence, sharp and perceptive, watching, measuring, and somehow judging. The man's lips twitched, forming words without sound, and Elias understood instinctively that to enter was to acknowledge the rules of the train, rules he could sense but not yet fully comprehend. A sudden jolt rocked the carriage, and the train emitted a low, resonant whistle that reverberated through the wood and metal. Elias stumbled, gripping the back of a chair for balance, and the passengers' heads turned almost in unison toward him, their eyes now fixed directly upon him. For the first time, their silence felt deliberate, almost predatory, and the young man realized that boarding the midnight train was not merely a choice. It was an initiation. Somewhere deep within, he felt the undeniable truth. This was no ordinary journey, and turning back was already impossible. The train jolted again, sharper this time, throwing Elias against the wall. His breath came in shallow, rapid bursts, each inhale tasting faintly of smoke and rusted iron. The carriage stretched impossibly before him, shadows coiling like living serpents along the walls, creeping toward the pale, silent passengers. He tried to focus on a single detail, a strap of a lantern, the worn edge of a seat, but every image seemed to waver, as if reality itself were dissolving. He felt eyes on him from every corner, though no one moved, the unblinking stares weighing like stones pressing against his skull. A woman's voice whispered somewhere in the carriage, a soft, melodic cadence that was immediately soothing yet deeply unnatural. "You must stay. You cannot leave. The journey is yours now." Elias turned sharply, searching for the source, but found only a reflection in the mirror at the far end. Himself? Or was it? The image blinked before he did, lips moving in silent, mocking repetition of the same words. Panic surged, but before he could retreat, the train shifted, a metallic groan filling the cabin as though the locomotive were alive, testing him, measuring his fear. He moved down the aisle, each step uncertain, every movement resisted by the oppressive weight of anticipation. The pale passengers remained perfectly still, yet the sense of their awareness intensified. The young girl from before now appeared on the opposite side of the carriage, impossibly closer than she should have been. Her doll, once cradled gently, now pointed directly at him with a rigid arm. "Do not resist," the voice echoed in his mind, and for the first time, Elias realized that the train did not merely carry passengers. It manipulated them, bending their senses and perception. The temperature dropped suddenly, frost forming along the edges of the windows, mist curling inside the carriage. Every reflection became distorted, faces elongating into grimaces, eyes hollowing into black voids. Elias stumbled backward, colliding with a wall, and felt his own shadow detach, stretching unnaturally across the floor, moving independently. It whispered a low, rasping murmur, "Join us forever." His hands trembled violently as he pressed them to his ears, trying to block the sound, but it seeped through, penetrating his mind, insinuating itself into the corners of his thoughts. A sudden, ear-splitting whistle tore through the train, shaking the wooden floorboards and rattling the lanterns. The walls rippled, or perhaps the entire carriage was bending, tilting towards some unseen force. Passengers rose in unison now, the first movement he had seen from them, and they began to advance slowly, silently, each step a synchronized echo that reverberated through Elias's chest. The young girl led them, doll in hand, her eyes glimmering with a malevolent intelligence that seemed far beyond a child's understanding. He stumbled back toward the central compartment, heart hammering, breath ragged, mind teetering on the edge of collapse. Through the fog of fear, he realized the train itself was a predator, the passengers its instruments, the corridors traps. The door to the central compartment loomed ahead, an ambiguous sanctuary or the next stage of the nightmare. Elias forced himself to focus, summoning every shred of courage as the advancing figures closed in, their silent stares promising only a chilling fate, to become one with the train, pale and still, trapped between life and a journey from which there was no return. A deep, resonant rumble rolled through the carriage, shaking him to the core, and for the first time, he understood the full extent of the midnight train's hunger. Elias reached the central compartment, his palms slick with sweat, legs trembling with exhaustion and fear. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a chamber bathed in an unnatural amber light. The air was thick and almost viscous, carrying a smell of burnt coal and faint decay. Chairs were arranged in a wide circle, and seated in each was a passenger, the pale, Silent faces he had seen earlier now turned fully toward him, unblinking, their eyes reflecting a strange inner fire. The young girl was there too, her doll resting on her lap, and her gaze seemed to pierce straight through him, revealing every secret doubt and lingering fear he had tried to suppress. He stepped inside, and the door slammed shut behind him with a resonant, hollow bang, sealing him in. The floor vibrated faintly, a low, rhythmic pulse that resonated in his chest, and Elias realized it was in sync with his own heartbeat. Each beat amplified the sense of dread pressing upon him, a tangible weight, as though the train itself were alive, feeding on his terror. The passengers began to move slowly, hands reaching out, bodies gliding across the floor with an unnatural, synchronized precision. Every instinct screamed to run, but his legs felt as though they were anchored to the floor with invisible chains, his movements delayed by an unseen force. The young girl stood, doll in hand, and the whisper that had haunted his mind since boarding became audible, filling the room. "Come, join us." The sound was seductive and threatening all at once, wrapping around his consciousness like a coiling serpent. The walls seemed to contract, narrowing the space, and shadows poured across the floor, crawling toward him, black and sinuous, stretching impossibly long. Elias stumbled backward, nearly falling, and felt his shadow detach, writhing independently, mocking him, urging surrender. Panic surged, a cold, paralyzing force gripping his limbs. In a desperate bid to retain his senses, Elias slammed his hand onto a chair and willed himself to breathe deeply. He focused on one single thought: survival. The amber light flickered, revealing glimpses of the train's interior stretching beyond reason. Corridors bending impossibly, staircases leading nowhere, windows showing landscapes that shifted unnaturally from countryside to storm-lashed cliffs. The passengers encircled him slowly, silent and resolute. Yet Elias felt a sliver of power within him. The knowledge that fear could be resisted, that surrender was optional, though the cost would be immense. The floor trembled violently, and the train emitted a low, resonant groan that vibrated through every bone in his body. He felt the pull of the carriage, an irresistible tug toward the circle, where the shadows seemed thickest, most oppressive. Sweat ran down his face, soaking his clothes, yet his resolve hardened. Every whispered "come" became a battle cry in his mind, a challenge, a test, a negotiation between his will and the train's inexorable hunger. He understood now that the midnight train was not merely a vehicle. It was a sentient entity, alive, patient, and endlessly hungry for souls, feeding not on bodies but on fear, hesitation, and surrender. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elias stepped forward cautiously, focusing not on the encroaching figures but on the door behind him, the faint glimmer of safety it promised. The shadows recoiled slightly, the ambient pulse slowed, and the amber light dimmed, revealing only the train and its occupants, patient, watching, waiting. For the first time, he sensed a choice, a sliver of agency in a situation that had seemed utterly hopeless. The train had brought him here to test him, to see if he would yield, and he realized that the coming moments would define whether he would become another pale passenger, forever trapped, or if he could escape the grasp of the midnight train. Elias's hands trembled as he forced himself toward the exit at the far end of the central compartment. The amber light that had bathed the circle of pale, Silent passengers seemed to writhe and recoil with every step, the shadows stretching impossibly long, crawling like living serpents along the polished wood. The unblinking eyes of the passengers followed him, each gaze heavy with an intelligence that felt alien, predatory, and eternal. The low, resonant hum of the train, like a heartbeat magnified 1,000-fold, pressed against his chest, making every movement feel sluggish, as though he were wading through an invisible, suffocating syrup of dread. The young girl stood at the edge of the circle, doll in hand, eyes gleaming with unnatural luminescence. Her lips parted in a whisper that pierced the heavy silence. "Do not leave, you belong like the others." A chill ran down Elias's spine, but he steadied himself, drawing a ragged breath and speaking aloud, his voice raw yet resolute. "I will not stay. I refuse." The words rippled through the carriage, bouncing off walls, merging with the metallic groan of the train and echoing in his own mind. Shadows twisted and convulsed, lanterns flickered violently, and the oppressive pulse of the carriage seemed to weaken, as though the midnight train was testing him, weighing his will against its own. Summoning every ounce of courage, Elias lunged forward, feet slipping slightly on the polished floor, heart hammering like a drum of war. The door loomed before him, a fragile threshold separating nightmare from reality, and he threw himself through it. Cold night air engulfed him instantly, fog curling around his legs like ghostly fingers. The whistle of the train receded into the distance, faint but unmistakable, and the oppressive weight lifted, leaving him trembling yet alive. Elias's shadow rejoined him fully, though the memory of its earlier independence lingered like a warning etched into his very bones. Behind him, the midnight train vanished into the mist, its massive cars swallowed by darkness, wheels whispering silently over the rails. Yet Elias knew instinctively that it had not truly gone. The train was patient, eternal, and inexorably hungry. Somewhere out there, in the fog and the night, it waited for the next traveler drawn by despair, curiosity, or simple human boldness. The smell of smoke and iron lingered on the platform, a subtle reminder of its presence and of the countless souls it had claimed. His survival felt fragile, temporary, as though the train had allowed him to escape only to measure him, to see how long he might live before he or another would once again fall under its spell. Elias stumbled toward the edge of the platform, glancing back through the mist. A faint glimmer of amber light shimmered where the train had disappeared, as though mocking him, promising the inevitability of its return. He shivered, the realization heavy in his chest. The midnight train did not forget, did not rest, and it never stopped searching. Its corridors stretched into infinity, its passengers frozen in their pale, silent vigil, eternally waiting for the next unfortunate soul to cross its path. Elias exhaled slowly, lungs cold with night air, heart still hammering. Somewhere beyond the veil of fog, beyond reason and time, the midnight train awaited, patient, insatiable, eternal, and it would come again. The end for now.